we're talking about adding or injecting maximum power into your techniques and trying to achieve this sort of dynamic range of movement, this sort of like explosive power, that is, you know, pretty much the pièce de résistance of martial arts. It's kind of the top of the mountain, right? It's from a technique perspective, that's where we all want to get to. We want to get to powerful, dynamic, efficient technique, you know? And there's a lot of aspects to consider when chasing that dream. So I'm going to just kind of hyper focus on a particular element. When I think about movement, I always like to think about where energy is expelled, where energy is stored before it is to be sort of expelled again, and how those two sort of those two ideas kind of play off one another, where energy is sort of you know, sort of a rudimentary kind of example of this would be like in a punch. Like if energy is stored, if you're about to sort of punch with your left hand, you know, you should be loaded on that left side. Let's just sort of all agree on that. But once you sort of release that left side and you sort of and you snap that punch out, you sort of like use your koshi, you know, elements of waving and whipping and speed acceleration, and you sort of right do that punch. Now you have loaded now on the other side, right? So you haven't sort of gone back to a state of zero, right? If you think about conservation of energy in terms of where we're storing the energy in our hips. After doing that technique, you haven't really returned to sort of this like neutral position, right? You should release the energy, and then you're kind of in a position here, I can feel some tension now on the other side, right? I've expelled a bunch of energy on the left. I've twisted, right? I've whipped, twisted, koshi, bearing down on my abdominal muscles, and I've fired at that technique. And now on the other side, I feel a little bit of tension now on the other side. And I can almost sort of play these two off of one another, back and forth. I can, right? Now I'm loaded a little bit on my right side. Now I'm loaded on my left side. And these two, I guess, sources of energy are kind of playing off one another. One is feeding into the next. And you can take that idea and you can apply it to your kata training. There are so many areas, so many techniques, and so many combinations of techniques in your kata where this applies. You could almost spend, you know, an entire lifetime playing with it and sort of trying to streamline it and trying to make it better and more efficient for yourself. I'll talk a little bit about Wushu, right? So Wushu, pardon me, Wankan, right? So Wankan in Matsubashi-ryu opens up with a shuto to the right, nice and slow, right? So you shoot to the right, you sort of cleared a space here, right? Then you're looking the other way, you know, you're coming back. Now you've sort of cleared, and then you're going to step back, you're going to load, boom, boom, double punch, right? Well, all of those techniques, all of the techniques are fed by the technique that's preceding it, right? Here's just speed it up. I'll talk through it as we're going, right? So I'm in yoi position, right? And even here, my pelvis is not in a neutral position. It's slightly tilted. I'm not standing sort of like this. It's sort of a side-on view here. I kind of engage my core, engage my glutes, engage my abs a little bit, and I get like a little bit of a pelvic tip, right? There's a little bit of tension there. You're not stiff, right? It's akin to sort of being in an athletic stance, right? There's standing with your legs completely locked, your knees completely locked, and then there's just slightly bent. Well, when you do that, the muscles in and around the kneecaps, the calves, the thighs, the quads, they all have a little bit of tension in them. They're not completely relaxed, and that's completely normal and is to be expected. And it's the same idea when we're talking about standing in yoi position. Again, my knees are not completely locked out. They're slightly bent, and I've got a little bit of a pelvic tip because I've just slightly engaged my abs and my glutes and my lower back, right, into sort of like a ready kind of position, which is what yoi is, right? So I'm going to step to the right, do my shuto. As I step out, now I leave my belly button kind of facing the direction with where I started, but now that I'm moving my other leg out to the side, I can feel this tension building on the left side, right? It's almost like when you're stretching, right? You feel that tension when you're sort of stretching into an area where maybe your tendons are not quite used to going or beyond your normal flexibility range. You feel that tension. It's the same thing, right? So now I feel tension all up through here, in through the left side of my groin, in through my buttocks, and then now I'm going to like let that tension go as I step out. I come up, and I release that tension, right? So that's the first technique. So I come up, release. Now I'm stepping the other way. I'm going to go back the other direction. But I don't completely face the other direction and step in on a straight line like that, right? I let the tension build again, right? Place that foot on the ground, step out now, and now I feel, see, I'm kind of loaded on this other side, and I whip that out. And then now I'm loaded right here, and I'm going to be directing the energy out in that direction. And this is probably one of the moves in this particular kata where I see that there's tons of room for improvement, right? Because you'll see people will sort of they'll step out, and they'll kind of load. They'll do this sort of big circular with their arms like that. They go out, and then they come back. When really, you should use the energy that's stored here, shoot it out that way in a almost like a kime or instantaneous fashion, right? And you should just, right, load the hip, unleash the hip, and fire it out into the direction of where you're stepping, right? Because you're sort of stepping in this kind of direction here. That's what you want to do. You just want to go. Now I'm loaded on my right side, and I'm going to punch right, which is perfect, because now I'm directing the technique out, shooting it out with my hips, right? And now I'm loaded on this side now, and I'm about to do another punch, right? So those four techniques, they feed into each other, just kind of uninterrupted. I'll do the techniques, and you can see that they just seem a little bit more instantaneous, as opposed to step first, load, fire. It almost, everything kind of just almost happens on the step. Just you get there a little bit faster, right? So same yoi position, right? Right, so I'm using my hips from the preceding technique, or that tension that builds up after you fired the preceding technique, that little bit of tension. I'm using that to fire into the next technique. And a lot of our kata, Matsubashi-ryu, I am no expert with Goju-ryu or other styles. I focus specifically on Matsubashi-ryu, but movement is movement, right? And kata, there's a lot of just stepping, right? One foot to the next in kata, whether you're changing directions, whatever the technique is. Every time that you do that, there's an opportunity to load your hip, your power. I say load the hip, but that's probably an inappropriate way to describe it. Store your energy on that side, and use it. Use it when you take that next step, and feed it into your next technique.